Picture this. You're standing in an elevator, staring at the digital numbers ticking upward toward your floor, and you are crying.
Like actually crying.
Right. Not just welling up with a bit of morning anxiety, but fully crying on your very first day back in the office. And that visceral scene is exactly what happened to a woman named Dana, whose story kind of kicks off the incredibly revealing material we are taking a deep dive into today.
Which, completely shatters that entire corporate illusion of the triumphant return to the workplace. Because the corporate narrative usually features, like, smiling employees, holding coffee cups, and high-fiving in the lobby.
Yeah, high fives and free donuts.
Exactly. But Dana's reality is, well, it's much darker.
Because Dana wasn't shedding tears of joy about seeing her colleagues again. She was crying because she had sat at her kitchen table that morning and done the brutal math of her day.
The commute math.
Yes. She was facing a 90-minute commute each way into downtown Toronto on a packed, standing room-only subway. And the source mentions how she lingered at the door for a long moment before grabbing her bag, just listening to her 3-year-old daughter say, "Mama, stay."
Oh, wow. That's heartbreaking.
It really is, because for years, Dana had been able to just say, "Oh, okay, just upstairs," and actually mean it. Now all that autonomy was just gone.
And adding a layer of extreme frustration to this whole thing is her performance record. I mean, Dana's productivity scores had been sitting comfortably in the top quartile of her entire department for 2 straight years.
Right, she wasn't slacking off.
Not at all. She achieved every bit of that from her spare bedroom. She wasn't struggling. She was absolutely thriving.
Yet despite those top-tier metrics, she wakes up to this terse Friday email from HR. The mandate is suddenly 3 days a week in the office, effective Monday.
With no exceptions.
No exceptions, unless a doctor is literally signing off on it. And there is no real operational explanation either. Just that tired, copy-pasted line about how in-person collaboration is core to our culture.
Right.
She cries in the elevator, composes herself, walks into a glass-walled conference room, and sits through a mandatory meeting that everyone sitting at that table quietly realizes
Could have been an email.
could have been a 3-line email.
It's the ultimate modern workplace insult, really. It is the forced performance of productivity over actual measurable output.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because today we are diving into an absolutely fascinating collection of reporting that covers the last 4 years of modern work.
Yeah, the great remote work experiment.
Exactly. We are examining the intense battle over return-to-office mandates, what we call RTO, and the hidden forces that are quietly pushing you back to your desk.
And some of those forces are pretty surprising.
Very surprising. We are talking about everything from the sunk costs of empty skyscrapers to the invisible hand of city mayors. We're going to look at the real data, tear apart the hidden motives, and basically figure out what it all means for you and the future of how we earn a living.
Because Dana's moment in the elevator is essentially the story of the last 4 years distilled into a single commute. And to understand why those tears were falling, we really have to rewind and look at the exact mechanics of what we collectively realized we were losing before the year 2020.
Right, let's talk about the villain we didn't even know was stealing our time, the daily commute.
Oh, yeah.
Before March 2020, we just accepted it as a law of physics. It was like bad weather, unpleasant, inevitable. You just grit your teeth and deal with it. But let's look at the math from the source material, because the sheer scale of the time loss is, well, it's staggering.
It really is.
The average North American worker was spending nearly an hour a day in transit.
And, an hour a day sounds manageable until you look at the compounding effect.
Exactly. You multiply that hour across a standard working year, and you are looking at roughly 250 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, that equates to more than 6 full work weeks every single year, just sitting in gridlock traffic, gripping a steering wheel, or pressed up against total strangers on a commuter train.
All to do what?
Right. For what ultimate purpose? To arrive at a designated building to do the exact same things you could do at home on a laptop. It is an analogy I keep returning to. The daily commute was basically like this terrible, overly expensive subscription service that we didn't even know we were allowed to cancel.
Oh, that's a perfect way to put it.
Right, and once we finally canceled it and experienced the freedom, we couldn't even fathom the idea of voluntarily signing up for it again.
And what's fascinating here is the psychological shift that accompanied that realization. Because when that commute vanished practically overnight, the immediate reaction wasn't just like a sigh of relief.
It was deeper than that.
Much deeper.
Mm-hmm.
The reporting points out a very specific emotional response. People felt retroactively robbed.
Retroactively robbed. That is such a potent way to phrase it. It implies an injury that you are only just now noticing.
Right, you suddenly look back at a decade of your life and think, I spent thousands of hours staring at taillights. So when those 250 hours a year were handed back to the workforce, they didn't just evaporate. We saw a massive redistribution of human energy.
Where did it all go?
Well, people poured that newly discovered time into getting 8 hours of sleep, into having breakfast with their families, into regular
And
exercise.
into actual focused work.
Yes.
That is the great irony of this entire debate. The ingrained corporate myth was always that if people were left unmonitored at home, they would just, immediately start watching television and slacking off.
Right, the whole pajamas on the couch stereotype.
Exactly. But the data proves that productivity actually spiked for a massive chunk of the knowledge workforce. Because, let's be real, the office, as we constructed it, is fundamentally designed to generate interruptions.
Oh, the architecture itself works against deep focus. You have those open plan layouts where you can literally hear 3 different phone calls happening simultaneously.
Not to mention the impromptu birthday cake in the break room.
Oh, absolutely.
Or the well-meaning colleague who they just stop by your desk while you are deep in the middle of a complex thought, completely shattering your concentration.
Yeah, it takes so long to get that focus back.
Right. But at home, knowledge workers could finally enter a flow state and just get things done without someone tapping them on the shoulder.
And companies initially accepted this remote shift because they were backed into a corner, right? They had absolutely no alternative. But as the months dragged on, the internal data rolled in, and the executive suites just couldn't argue with the metrics.
Numbers don't lie.
They don't. Deals were still closing at record rates. Complex software was still shipping on time. Plus, from a pure balance sheet perspective, the overhead dropped. Nobody had to expense employee parking or cater corporate lunches. The system was functioning perfectly well without the physical building.
So here's where it gets really interesting. Because I have to ask the giant, flashing question that the source material points us toward.
Go for it.
If we were so demonstrably productive at home, and the internal data proved it beyond a shadow of a doubt,
Yeah.
why the sudden aggressive rush to force everyone back? Like, why did HR send Dana that terse email demanding 3 days a week in the office, claiming it was core to the culture? Is this entire culture argument just corporate gaslighting to cover up a massive financial disaster?
Well, the reporting points directly to the elephant in the room. The issue that rarely makes it into the cheerful company all-hands meetings. It boils down to the mechanics of commercial real estate.
Okay.
Major corporations do not rent office space month to month. They are locked into incredibly expensive long-term commercial leases, often spanning 10 to 15 years.
Right, because building out an entire floor with custom networking, glass conference rooms, and ergonomic workstations that costs millions, so they amortize that cost over a decade.
Precisely. So now, picture a 40-story tower in downtown Manhattan or on Bay Street in Toronto, sitting at 15% capacity. It is a hemorrhaging financial liability.
Ouch.
Imagine the psychology of a CEO having to sit in a boardroom and explain to their board of directors why the company is burning $18 million a year in operating expenses for entire floors that sit completely dark for the majority of the week.
Their board is going to demand they cut the loss.
Exactly.
But they can't just break a commercial lease without massive financial penalties, right?
They are trapped. So the return-to-office mandates serve as a highly effective control mechanism to justify those massive sunk costs. I mean, think about it. It is exponentially easier for a CEO to stand at a podium and declare, innovation requires our physical presence.
Than it is to tell the truth.
Right. Than it is to admit, we made a massive 10-year real estate bet, the market shifted, we are legally locked in, and we need your bodies in these chairs to justify this $18 million line item to our investors.
Man, that makes so much sense. But wait, I'm struggling to understand something else the source spread out, which sounds almost conspiratorial on its face.
The mayors.
Yes. The article claims your local mayor wants you back at your desk.
Yeah.
How can a city mayor possibly dictate HR policy to a private tech company or a marketing firm? Like, they don't have the legal authority to force a CEO to recall workers. So how exactly does that work behind closed doors?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it really comes down to the concept of soft influence in economic survival. Cities are fundamentally organized around a very specific, fragile assumption
Which is?
that hundreds of thousands of office workers will commute into the urban core every single day. The underlying mechanics of a downtown economy rely entirely on the density of those commuters.
Oh, because when they commute, they buy a $5 coffee, they eat a $15 salad at a local cafe for lunch,
Exactly.
they pay for parking, and they pop into retail shops after work. They are essentially funneling billions of dollars into the downtown service economy.
Right, and when that daily migration stops, you trigger what urban planners call an urban vacuum. And it is a brutal cascade effect.
Like dominoes falling.
Exactly. Without the lunch rush, the local restaurants close down. Retail shops board up their windows. But the most critical hit is to the municipal infrastructure, specifically the public transit systems.
Oh, the trains and buses.
Yeah. Transit relies heavily on fare box recovery. That's the actual money commuters pay for tickets. So when ridership drops by 60%, the transit authority loses millions in revenue. They are forced to defer maintenance, cut routes, and lower the quality of service, which of course only drives even more riders away in this vicious death spiral.
Which ultimately destroys the city's tax base. I mean, if property values drop because the downtown is dead, the city can't fund its schools or emergency services.
That is the exact nightmare scenario keeping mayors awake at night. So we saw several major cities actively lobbying their largest corporate tenants.
But not officially, right?
No, it wasn't done through official legislation. It was done through phone calls. An economic development office speaks to a major CEO. The city often holds massive leverage over these companies regarding future zoning permits, tax incentives, and public relations.
So they put the pressure on.
Right. The subtle underlying message from the mayor's office is, our downtown is dying. We desperately need foot traffic to save our service economy and our transit system, and forcing your employees back into the buildings is how we get it.
Okay, I have to say, I'm still blown away by the reality of that dynamic. Because suddenly, your personal interests as a worker, like protecting your time, maintaining your flexibility, keeping your sanity, are structurally pitted against the municipal budget of the city you reside in.
It's wild to think about.
You are essentially fighting against your own mayor's tax base.
It creates a profound tension. The individual's optimal environment for deep, focused work clashes directly against the city's need for a high-volume economic engine.
Okay, I hear all of this. I understand the mechanics of the hidden financial motives, the $18 million leases burning a hole in the balance sheet, the mayors desperately wanting our lunch money to fund the trains.
Yeah.
But I have to push back a little bit on the other side of the coin. Is the argument that innovation happens in person completely fabricated? Do we genuinely lose absolutely nothing by staring at each other through screens all day?
No, that's a vital distinction to make, and the source material treats this counter-argument very fairly. The short answer is no. The argument isn't entirely fake. There is a deeply legitimate structural case for the physical office.
Like the informal hallway chats, the mythical water cooler moments.
Well, beyond just chatting, we are talking about the mechanics of tacit knowledge. Research consistently shows that the accidental encounters between totally different departments, like the marketing person bumping into the software engineer while getting coffee, that can spark genuine operational breakthroughs.
Right, and the article specifically highlighted the plight of a 24-year-old starting their very first professional job entirely over Zoom. I had a huge amount of empathy for that scenario.
It's so tough for them.
Because if you are remote from day one, you miss out on the vital process of osmosis. You aren't sitting in a room absorbing how a senior partner masterfully de-escalates a furious client on a phone call.
Yeah, you don't get to see that play out.
You aren't picking up on the physical cues or the unwritten rules of the culture. And that kind of mentorship is incredibly difficult to formalize into like a PDF training manual.
Those early career moments of observation are absolutely critical for professional development. But the text makes a razor-sharp distinction here, acknowledging that some in-person time has tangible value for mentorship is a thoughtful operational insight.
Okay.
Mandating that every employee must be in this specific zip code on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays or face disciplinary action is a completely different mechanism.
One is a strategy for knowledge transfer, and the other is just brute force compliance. Which brings us to the current state of affairs. We've largely landed on this negotiated standoff called hybrid work. It's pitched to us as the ultimate compromise, right? You get to keep your pajama pants on Monday and Friday, but you put on hard pants and commute in for the middle of the week.
The theory behind hybrid work is to capture the best of both environments. You preserve the flexibility workers demand while ensuring the in-person collaboration that executives crave.
In theory.
Right, in theory. However, the reporting explicitly details why the math of hybrid work often fails so spectacularly in execution. It basically comes down to a massive failure of coordination.
Yeah, because trying to make hybrid work function without strict top-down coordination is like trying to play a fast-paced team sport where half the players are operating on a 5-second tape delay.
That is exactly what happens. If an organization tells everyone to come in 3 days a week, but leaves the specific days up to individual choice, you end up with a ghost town on Mondays and Fridays.
And an absolute fire hazard of an overcrowded office on Wednesdays.
Precisely. The entire goal of spontaneous collaboration is defeated if the person you actually need to collaborate with chose Tuesday as their office day and you chose Wednesday.
It creates a phenomenon the workers call the worst of both worlds.
Yeah.
Because you suffer through that grueling 90-minute commute, you get to your desk, you maybe attend one actual in-person meeting.
If you're lucky.
Right, and then you spend the next 6 hours sitting at a cubicle, putting on noise-canceling headphones, and logging into Zoom to talk to your team members who are working from home that day.
That's absurd.
You surrender the deep focus of your home office, but you don't receive any of the magical, spontaneous collaboration you were promised.
And we also have to examine the psychology of proximity bias, which the data proves is a highly destructive side effect of hybrid setups. Studies consistently show that remote-first workers receive fewer promotions and smaller raises.
Wait, really?
Yes, even when their measurable output is identical or superior to their in-office peers.
I want to understand the why behind that. Like, why does a manager penalize the remote worker if their code is just as good or their sales numbers are just as high?
It is rooted in a psychological shortcut called the availability heuristic. The human brain assesses value based on what it can easily recall. So managers unconsciously reward the physical performance of labor. They literally saw the in-office worker sweating at their desk at 6:10 p.m. They heard them typing.
But the remote worker is just out of sight, out of mind.
Exactly. The remote worker silently submitted flawless work at 2:00 p.m. and went for a run, but they were invisible. How do you construct a fair, unbiased performance review when one employee is constantly walking past the boss's glass office and the other is a square on a monitor?
You can't.
Right. Hybrid work doesn't bridge that gap. It often widens it, creating two entirely different classes of corporate citizens.
So, what does this all mean? If fully remote work isolates the junior staff, who are desperate to learn the ropes, and hybrid work is this exhausting, uncoordinated mess rife with psychological bias, what is the actual way forward? What is the core thing that workers actually want from their employers?
Well, the survey data cuts through all the noise on this specific point. The numbers show unequivocally that the vast majority of people do not actually hate the physical office.
They hate the mandate. They hate the lack of agency.
They resent being dictated to. They hate the inflexibility of being told exactly where they must sit on a Tuesday, entirely divorced from what their actual workload demands on that specific Tuesday. The core desire echoing through all of this research is simply trust.
Trust. It comes down to treating your workforce like functioning, rational adults.
Yeah.
Workers want the professional respect to look at their calendar on a Monday morning and make an executive decision. Like, my entire day is deep focus coding and data analysis. I am staying home where it's quiet. Or, we have to thrash out a massively complex design problem. I am going to commute in so we can lock ourselves in a room with a whiteboard.
Exactly.
It's not a demand to never wear business casual again. It is a demand for the autonomy to match the environment to the task.
Which loops us perfectly back to the resolution of Dana's story.
Oh, right. What happened to Dana?
She didn't stay and accept the rigid mandate. The source notes that she eventually polished her resume and left her job.
Good for her.
Yeah, she sought out a fully remote position at a direct competitor. She actually took a modest pay cut to secure that autonomy, and she reports being infinitely happier, more engaged with her work.
And the ultimate punchline to the entire ordeal. 6 months after Dana turned in her badge, her old company is still desperately trying to fill her vacancy. Only now, they have quietly updated the job listing. Guess what it says at the top?
Let me guess.
Remote friendly.
Wow. Markets are incredibly efficient at teaching lessons that executives refuse to learn from internal memos. I mean, the labor force has lived the alternative. They have restructured their lives, their childcare, and their health around this flexibility.
They're not going backwards.
No. Supply and demand dictate that top talent will simply migrate toward the organizations that offer agency. Workers are not going to feign amnesia and pretend the pre-2020 commute was optimal just because a CEO has a commercial lease expiring in 2027.
Yeah, so whether you are the listener currently relishing the quiet focus of your home setup, or you are the listener actively struggling to figure out how to mentor a new graduate through a screen, The mechanics of this battle affect your daily reality.
Absolutely.
The future of how we work isn't going to be neatly solved by a single HR policy tomorrow. It is going to be loud, it's going to be messy, and the tension between flexibility and physical presence is going to be fiercely negotiated for years to come.
This raises an important question, though. A totally different implication for you to mull over.
What's that?
We know the corporate market is punishing inflexible companies right now by poaching their top talent. But let's look at the broader geographic shift. All of those $15 salads and $5 coffees that Dana used to buy in downtown Toronto.
Yeah.
For the last 4 years, she has been spending that money in her own suburban neighborhood. We've seen a massive economic boom in residential towns and rural areas that suddenly absorbed all that localized spending.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought about that.
Right. So if the massive corporations eventually win this tug of war and successfully force everyone back into the urban core, what happens to the newly revitalized main streets in our suburbs when all that remote worker money suddenly gets sucked back downtown?
That is a phenomenal point. We've been so focused on the downtown urban vacuum, we haven't even considered the potential collapse of the local suburban economies that have grown completely dependent on remote workers staying home.
It's all connected.
It really is. It proves that the doors closing on Dana in that elevator aren't just deciding one employee's daily schedule. They are deciding the economic fate of entire zip codes.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We have unpacked a massive amount of hidden machinery today, and we will catch you on the next one.